Hi, how are you today?
I'm good.
Welcome. Thank you for doing this interview. We're both looking forward to it. So how would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Maura O'Donovan. I'm a sister of the Holy Faith, and that's an Irish congregation. Our sisters came to New Orleans, I think around 1967. It was after Hurricane Betsy. Archbishop Hannon was the Archbishop of New Orleans at the time, and a lot of damage had been done to the churches and the schools here. And he went to Ireland. I'm sure he went to other places, but he went to Ireland recruiting sisters and priests to come to help with the rebuild. And so our community came at that time. I wasn't one of those, yes.
So what brought you to New Orleans then?
Well, in 1996, our sisters were at Epiphany Church in the 7th Ward, and they had been there for a number of years before that, I think since the early 70s. And the Archdiocese then decided around the middle 90s to close the school. And our sisters really, didn't have any say in that decision. But the leadership of my community decided at that stage to find a sister to come to do some other work in the parish since the school was closing, because so that the people wouldn't have the double loss of the school and the sisters' presence. It was an African American area, New Orleans, and the presence of the sisters, I think, was important. So I was the one sent. Well, I had some choice on it. I came down and looked, and I decided that I would take up the offer.
And you worked as a sister in Ireland prior?
Oh, yes. I worked both in Ireland and in Trinidad and the West Indies. I'm a teacher, and I was a school principal for a number of years. And then in the early 90s, I went to Boston College to do a master's in pastoral ministry. So that offered me other possibilities beyond teaching. And in the Irish system, we work for the Irish government, and I had about 10 more years to do. So I made the decision to come to the American region of our community. One of my good friends was leader at that time, and she invited me to come, so I took up the offer, and I went to San Francisco for the first year, and then, this need arose then in New Orleans in the following year. So she asked me to come down and, look at what the place was like. I had been in New Orleans on a visit briefly before that, but I came and I really never left.
Yeah. Was there something that kept you here?
Pardon me?
Something that kept you here specifically? Church?
I was very attracted towards the people. And in the first few years, I began going to Xavier, to the Institute of Black Catholic Studies, to learn about the culture. And I was very impressed by all of that. And I just began to become a New Orleanian,
Awesome.
I guess, yeah.
So you've lived here since the 90s?
I've lived here, yes. I think I was 9 years at, 9 years at the time of Katrina. And that parish was closed. And so then, since then, I've stayed on, but I'm retired, but everything I'm doing is voluntary, yes.
What kind of work are you doing in your retirement?
In my retirement, I'm still closely associated with that community whose church was closed. And So one of the things I do is, I try to visit some of those people, stay in contact with them. But I also opened a collection at the Amistad Research Centre, which is close by here. And I keep records of different events. They're mostly funerals, unfortunately, but other events that people are celebrating. And so I opened the collection and, just keep adding to the collection so that the memory of that community will not be forgotten. Very soon the people who attended that church are going to be gone and nobody will ever know that they existed. And they were an important part of the history of New Orleans. And I want them to be remembered. So another thing I do is I transferred to St. Gabriel the Archangel, which is another African American church, after Katrina. And I was invited, to be involved in adult faith formation there, which I did. And so, gradually I passed that ministry on to one of the parishioners who actually went to school here in Loyola. She did a master's in pastoral studies. And but now that parish is being closed too. Mm. So, but what I do is, mainly for that parish, but for other people, I do a weekly reflection on the Sunday readings, which goes out to about 60 people. And then I have a collection at Amistad. I also do internal work for my own community. And then, of course, I'm involved with a group that I helped to found, Burning Bush, Catholic Sisters and Brothers for an End to Violence. Mm. And that's in existence for about 12 years.
Wow. Can you talk a bit more about that organization?
Yeah, well, it started at a community meeting that our sisters had about 2012. And we felt, the religious here in the city are doing wonderful ministries. But when it comes to an issue of social justice, we felt, that we didn't have kind of a corporate voice. So anyhow, we decided that we would ask the then vicar for religious, who was Sister Sylvia Thibodeau, a Holy Family sister. And she was the vicar at the time. And we asked her, we told her about her dream, and she told us, run with it. And she notified the other religious through her contact list. And so we called a meeting, and people seemed to be interested. Now, initially, that's 12 years ago. Mm-hmm. There were more sisters, and they were younger. And one of the hopes that we had at that time was that we would maybe become involved with trying to help, especially young black boys who were sometimes like getting into trouble. And if we had, maybe it's kind of like if some of us could be sponsors to them, walk with them. And well, some of us did that for a while. But then, as people got older, they didn't have the energy. And so we've had to let that dream go. But what we do now is, we can't address every issue, every social justice issue that comes up. But some, for instance, recently, the new legislation expanding the methods for the death penalty, that was something that we were very invested in. So we collected signatures, about 180 signatures, and wrote a petition to the governor, handed it in. And we also, I represented the group at a prayer vigil and press conference at the Capitol just a few weeks ago.
Wow.
As you know, our protests didn't bear much fruit, but we have to keep trying.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We just have to keep saying that this is not who we are, and that we're not going along with this.
That's wonderful.
So other things that we did over the years, like we organised rallies on immigration issues as they arose. So that's more or less it. That's what we do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are there any other causes that you advocated for through this organization that did bear fruit and had?
Well, really, the immigration issue, first of all, like trying to be an advocate for young people. And there are some groups looking after that, but that, you know, as I say, that became beyond the capacity of most sisters to be involved in. But the immigration issue, and now there was also another group that we supported. We don't always like just initiate things ourselves, but we support other groups. And there was a group, they originated up in New York. I just can't quite remember the name of the group, but they came down to First Grace Methodist Church, which is in Mid-City. And some of our members became involved in welcoming people who were being bused. When they started busing people, immigrants from the border up north, and the people didn't know where they were going, but they were just put on a bus. And they would come into the bus station here in New Orleans, and some of our sisters went down to the bus station and had little gifts for them, just something to ease their journey. Yeah, some people were able to speak their languages, but others weren't. But you can be kind to people without speaking their language. Yeah, you don't necessarily have to speak.
Yeah. That's so true, especially in that setting. That's particularly important. So is that a skill that you had to hone in your novitiate, or?
Well, I think my home and my community prepared me in a way for this. I had no idea that I was ever going to be in New Orleans when I was a child. And my parents certainly didn't ever envision me being here. But my mother was very, she always was very clear that we must always speak the truth and speak for those who were being treated unjustly. And my dad, was a conference leader in the St. Vincent de Paul Society, and our Catholic faith, of course, was very, very important to us growing up. And not only my immediate family, but I remember my two grandmothers. They were very devout Catholics, but they were kind of no-nonsense people. And then I went to school in Dublin to the Sisters of the Holy Faith, the congregation that I now belong to. And one of the things that impressed me about those sisters was that they always had a great care for poor children. And, we would notice that they would be passing maybe little bits of food and little gifts to children who were underprivileged. And, it was the war years. Second World War was going on until 1945. And, but even in the years after the war, life was very challenging. Great scarcity of food, there was rationing. everybody was poor. At least everybody in my circle was poor. So the sisters were always very, very caring. And the reason that I got high school education, we call it secondary school in Ireland, was that I got a scholarship, because my parents could hardly have afforded to send me to school, to high school. I mean, primary school was for free. And so, you know, I had that opportunity that many of the children that I went to school with didn't have. You know, some of them went straight into factories at age 14.
Wow.
And, or some of them went to what they call technical schools, and those schools taught them shorthand and typing. I know it's another, it's another era, long before computers. But shorthand was terribly important, you know, if you were to do any sort of secretarial work. And of course, typing. And that got people into little probably low-paying jobs. But like I was privileged that I got to go to high school. And then from high school, I went into the novitiate.
Was there a moment that you decided that I need to enter the novitiate, or?
You know, it was probably gradual. Another thing that probably impressed me a lot as a child was, you know, there were a lot of magazines in those days, like religious magazines. The different missionary congregations published magazines, and there were stories and pictures of missionaries in all kinds of exotic places, we thought. We just didn't realise like how hard it was for some of them. But it seemed a wonderful thing to do with your life. Another thing that impressed me in those years was I really didn't understand the war much, because I was 5 when it ended. But I mean, it was the whole culture. People talked about the war all the time, and then the scarcity after the war and the rationing and all that stuff. But gradually after the war, stories began to come out about what was going on in Germany and across Europe. And I was very, very, very influenced by some of those stories. And just, I couldn't believe that while I was having like a fairly normal childhood for those days, that, you know, people were being put into gas chambers.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, bringing it back to New Orleans or to Louisiana today, I mean, I just can't believe that our legislature would be passing laws to gas people.
Yeah.
Yeah, just breaks my heart. You know, that we've learned nothing from history.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would like you to talk a bit more about your parents and their influence and your family, and your faith background as a childhood, in childhood.
Well, I mean, church and God were terribly, terribly important. It was just central to our lives. And I mean, my father brought us to church on Sunday. My mother, there were 2 masses in our church. Now, this is before Vatican II. So it was the Latin liturgy. It was, you know, way above our heads. We really didn't understand much, except there was a kind of a mystique about the whole thing. And, you know, we engaged in private devotions while Mass was going on. It's hard for your generation to understand how that would happen. But that's the way it was. And, but, I mean, there was no way, I mean, unless you were seriously ill, that you would miss Mass on Sunday.
Wow.
And Mom went to early Mass, and then, you know, my father would bring us to the later Mass, and then Mum would have a great big breakfast cooked for us. That was your special Sunday treat.
What would she cook?
She'd cook what we called rashers, which is, Harvey might know about rashers. Rashers, it's just bacon. Rashers and eggs and sausages, pork sausages, white and black pudding, and homemade soda bread. Now, we ate soda bread all the time, but on a Sunday, like, you had what we called a fry. And when you'd be coming up along the road from church, of course, we walked, you could smell the fries from every house. Everybody was doing the same thing. You know, as I said, my dad was involved with St. Vincent de Paul. Mom, like, stayed at home because being a mother of four and a housewife in those days, like, we'd no clothes washer, no dishwasher. We didn't even have a refrigerator.
Wow.
Yeah. So she had to shop every day because, you know, there's no way of keeping food fresh without a refrigerator. And everything was homemade. But everything was, you know, during the week, the whole week was kind of focused on Sunday, and Saturday night, like, you were scrubbed, your hair was washed, and all in preparation for Sunday. And then Sunday was a day, like, when we, I mean, apart from going to Mass, we usually, like, had some little treat. It was very, very simple. It meant walking someplace, and, you know, there was a botanical gardens near us. We'd go there sometimes, and, you know, our parents would buy us some candy or an ice cream or something. And that was like, that wasn't something that you had every day. Yeah. But always speaking the truth. It doesn't mean we didn't tell lies, but the ideal was before us. And always to be caring for those in need. We thought we were poor, but I know really that there were people who were in dire need in those days, yes. My mother would, like, mend our clothes and then give them to the St. Vincent de Paul, and let me tell you, they were well worn when we were through with them, because, you know, it was expensive to buy stuff, and you couldn't even get it, like, in the first years after the war. There were, like, even clothing was rationed. You had to have coupons to buy stuff, yeah. And that was in an effort to make it everything fair for everybody, you know, so that people wouldn't be grabbing and depriving others. So there would be more equitable distribution, yeah.
So you speak about growing up in a very Catholic family and Catholic environment.
Right.
But did you ever face any challenges of faith?
You know, as I grew up, I began to realize that, you know, that even though, I mean, God was important for us, but there were a lot of things, like, in the church that were less than desirable. And it was a very authoritarian church. And, I mean, not all priests and bishops were like that, but many were. And also, like, the rules were very rigid. Like, during Lent, there was mandatory fasting every day from Ash Wednesday until Easter Sunday. And my dad, like, apart from working 6 days a week, he also, like, had a garden, and he grew vegetables to feed us. And so after work, like especially like from this time of the year on, in the spring, he would be working in the garden after work, after his paid work. And, you know, when he'd come in from that, he would be hungry. But the Lenten fast didn't allow him to have anything to eat. And I just felt that that was, you know, it was inhumane. But they were very, very strict about it. You know, this is what the church asked them to do. So they did it. Now, I mean, there was a lot of abuse going on at the time, but we had no idea. I now realise what was going on, but as I say, we had no idea that was going on behind the scenes. But and as I say, not all priests and bishops were like that, but some were. They were very, very hard. At the beginning of Lent, like the Archbishop would write out the Lenten regulations, and on like probably Sunday before Lent or the first Sunday of Lent, the Lenten regulations would be read out, like a big page of. Sorry, have I knocked over something?
You're okay.
Okay. And I mean, they were extremely strict. Yeah, there were no marriages, no weddings would take place during Lent. And if you wanted to get married, well, it was a sign that there was something wrong, that you had to be married. And it would be like down at the sacristy, and yeah, you couldn't have any celebration.
Is there anything that happens in the church now that you've seen that's progressed and gotten better?
Well, I mean, Vatican II was a welcome relief. And but unfortunately, you know, the church has been slow to implement some of the changes of the Second Vatican Council. And I'm a great supporter of Pope Francis and what he's trying to do at the moment, in trying to give a voice to the laity. And maybe a bit slower, giving a voice to women. But, I mean, certainly the laity had no voice when I was growing up. And sporadically, since Vatican II, there have been places like parishes where there was like a real pastoral council. But we know there are many churches, many parishes didn't have that. And I mean, at the moment we can see there's so much pushback.
Definitely.
Yes.
Are there any people in your community or in your life that have influenced you in your service?
Yes. I mean, many of the sisters who taught me. Obviously, I must have felt drawn towards the life that they led. Even though, like when I was a child, the school was right beside the convent. And so we were in and out of the convent, like the sisters would ask us to go in to the lady who cooked for them, give a message or get them something. And some of the things, you know, some of the academic things that we were taught actually took place in the convent building. So we were in and out quite a bit. So we saw like the good and the bad. But obviously they were women of great faith and great caring. And so that attracted me. In the more recent past, like since I've come to New Orleans, there are a number of people who stand out for me. Unfortunately, most of them have deceased now, but there were two sisters of St. Joseph, Sister Kathleen Ballinger and Sister Laurie Schaefer. And they were wonderful social justice women. Sister Clarita Burke, a Marionite. Sister Carla Dolce, an Ursuline. And then Sister Ava Regina Martin, a Holy Family sister, she came to me very shortly after I came to New Orleans and invited me to take a course of studies at the Institute for Black Catholic Studies at Xavier. And initially, like, I didn't jump at it, but she was very persuasive, and that was like a great enrichment in my life. I learned a lot about, you know, the culture of the African Americans, and how their faith is so important in their lives. Yes, that has been a wonderful enrichment to me. In my own community, the sister who invited me here, Sister Vicky Harron, she's a good friend. We were like in the novitiate together, and she was, you know, the leader in the American region of our community at that time, and she invited me. But then she also invited me to come to New Orleans, and you know, she's still alive, and I talked to her last night, and I said to her, like, I told her about this interview, and I said, you know, if I have an opportunity, I'm going to say how important you are in my life in offering me this new possibility. And I'm very, very grateful for that, yes.
Yeah. What would you describe how you were able to help people in New Orleans when Katrina happened?
You know, when Katrina happened and we were all displaced, and then eventually I was fortunate to be able to come back in October of 2005, the house that I lived in was gone. But some other sisters invited me to stay with them, which enabled me to come back. And but some of the sisters in California, where you know, most of my community in the United States live, they said, "Oh, come up, you know, there's nothing to be done down there, nothing happening." But I knew that it was very important. There were two of us here, very important for us to stay with the people, to go through the pain. I'm really grateful for that. More practically, a lot of church communities outside in other parts of the country wanted to come. They didn't want to join any of the big groups where it was kind of anonymous, like they would fix somebody's house, but they would never build a relationship with the people who own the house. So somehow or other, like they contacted me, and so there was a group from Seattle, from an Episcopal church. There was a group from Massachusetts, from a Unitarian church. There was another group from up, St. Louis, I think it was. And they came and they supplied the labour and sometimes even the materials to help people who couldn't afford to employ a contractor, or some people who employed a contractor and lost all their money, and you know, the repairs weren't done. So apart from the benefit of having the houses fixed and people being able to move back into their houses, I think it was the relationships that were established at that time. Several people said to me, "We can't believe that white people would come to help us." Wow. So, you know, some of those young people who are now adults and getting on with their lives are still in contact with some of those people. So I just feel it's, you know, that's the positive side of Katrina. It just opened up new avenues for relationships. just unbelievable, yeah. Yes.
And how did that experience shape your faith view and your work moving forward?
You know, one of the things I've learned from African Americans is how, despite all that they have been through in this country, that they can count their blessings instead of complaining. I'm Irish. Irish people tend to complain. And several times, especially after Katrina, I would meet people and I would say to them, "How are you doing today?" And they'd say, "Oh, I'm blessed." And I said, "Now come off that, you know, you've been through so much." And they'd say, "But, you know, I'm counting the blessings that I have. I got up this morning and I was able to get up and, you know, people are helping me." So they would list all the positives, not the negatives. You know, so that has been a big influence in my life. I just can't believe, that people would be, have that kind of blessed attitude. So it's helped me, yeah.
Now, you mentioned that there's a lot of negatives in the church when you were growing up, where like things you found out. Is there, would you say, more negatives or positives now? Because I know, especially in New Orleans, the black and white churches have joined together and a lot more another.
Well, I mean, I'm glad I lived through Vatican II. I'm glad I saw both sides of the coin. I mean, there were a lot of things that needed updating in the church. And certainly, like the whole thing of the liturgy, for instance, like being in the vernacular and laity being able to be involved in the liturgy. And, you know, where parishes are well run, that laity have a real voice and whatever, I see that as a positive. But, I mean, there's still, you know, the old habits die slowly. And a lot of the authoritarianism that I experienced as a child, you know, unfortunately still continues, yeah.
What do you think it will take to dismantle that or to change that in future
Well,
generations?
I'm hopeful, even though there's a pushback, I'm hopeful that, you know, that this synod that Pope Francis has called will bring about change. You know, I know that not much has happened about it here in this part of the country, but there are places where it has been, you know, the synodality thing has been embraced very enthusiastically. And yes, I'm hopeful that change will happen. But we humans tend to resist changing. Yeah, we like to stay with the tried and true. We might be giving out about it and complaining,
Yeah.
but we'll still hang with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you see younger generations taking the future of the church?
I'm very hopeful. You know, my nieces and my nephews, for the most part, don't go to church. But they're good people. And you know, God is looking after them. I'm not, you know, their parents might be a bit worried about them, but I just say God is in charge. God is in charge. And there are things that have happened in the church that I know has turned them off. And like the church in Ireland is much more in contact, I think, with the reality, because there's been such a huge exodus. In my experience here in the United States, it hasn't happened. But, you know, you don't see young people in church in Ireland. But I don't think people are bad. You know, I don't think they've lost their faith in God. But they, you know, And so the church is much humbler, I think, in Ireland than it was when I was growing up, yes.
How do you compare the experiences of going to church in Ireland versus what you've seen in the United States, at least among the public?
Well, as I say, when I go to church in Ireland, I mean, it's much, I mean, it's populated, the population is much sparser than it is here. But I think it has brought people to a realization that that some of the stuff that was going on was not necessarily healthy, and in accord with the vision of Jesus for the world. Maybe things have to get worse here before they can become better. Yeah.
Is there any advice you would give to, I mean, let's say your niece and nephews and people like us that are, developing more faith as we go on through life?
Yeah. One of the things that I have been able to focus on since I've come to the United States, I've done scriptural studies, and I went to the Holy Land, like on a study tour. I was there for a couple of months, and I've taken very, very good courses up at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, and it has opened up doors for me. That's why I continue to do that commentary on the Sunday readings, because I think that Scripture, being able to more have better understanding of what the gospel message is terribly, terribly important. I think in some ways, like that the institutional church has maybe veered away from the real gospel message. And scripture study, I think, is very, very important. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that we don't need the institutional church, but I think that we need to get closer to understanding what the real message of Jesus was. Yeah, like if you look at even the regalia that church leaders wear, and I know it's in recent times since Vatican II it has been simplified a little bit. That's my phone.
That's okay.
Oh dear Lord.
No, you're good.
Yeah. Is that messing up your interview?
No. If anything, it's adding to it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry,
well,
I should have remembered to turn
hey,
it
that's
off.
okay.
It never even dawned on me. Yeah.
We'll just let it
Thank
finish
you.
out. No
Thank you.
problem.
Yeah. Just bring me back to my thought there. Yes. Getting back closer to what what Jesus, the vision of Jesus, I think is terribly, terribly important. And so I was talking about the regalia. Like, you see, when the church became the official religion of the empire, the time of Constantine, the church took on a whole lot of the ostentation of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And so church leaders dressed like emperors. And I know it's been simplified, but can you imagine Jesus like going around dressed like some of those church leaders with all those? Yeah.
Do you think that contributes to the disillusionment that people
Well,
might
I
have?
mean, they're only clothes, but I think, yeah. Clothes are not the most important thing, But if you keep dressing like an emperor, you might begin to think that you are.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's been part of Pope Francis's.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yes, I mean, he's like when he was made Pope, he wouldn't wear some of those things that they were putting on him. And those red shoes,
Yeah.
threw them away. Yeah, and I forget the name of the you know, it's a kind of like a big stole, ornate stole. He wouldn't wear it. Yeah, yeah. He's. I believe he is a wonderful Pope, and I just hope that he lives long enough to see the second session of the Synod through. And the process that under his leadership has come into that Synod is terribly, terribly important. You know, it's not democracy, but it's every voice being heard, which is a far cry from what some of us have experienced. Yes.
Well, I think my final question would be, you know, you've obviously lived an amazing life, and you've experienced some negative things, and somehow you're able to find the positive in all of that. What do you think is the reason? I mean, other than faith, but what kept you going and kept you positive?
Oh, there have been challenging times. And there are times like when, yeah, I mean, there were several times when I thought of leaving religious life.
Really?
But something inside me kind of felt, despite all the dysfunction that I was experiencing, that, you know, my relationship with God was terribly important to me. And I've had amazing opportunities in my life. You know, if I hadn't joined my community, I would never have had these opportunities. I've been blessed. I've really been blessed. And I wouldn't, I mean, I would love to have, you know, when I see my siblings with their children and their grandchildren, of course I would love to have had that. But I've had, you know, relationships with people that I never would have met and known. And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. Yeah.
I love that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that wraps
I
up.
wouldn't undo it.
Wow.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you so
yeah,
much
thank you.
for
It was-
doing this with us.
Thank
It was
you.
lovely meeting you.
Yeah,
and
Thank
hearing
you.
your story.
Thank you.